Faced with the rapidly approaching Riku, the Doom Lord tightened his grip on his weapon, a long curved blade set upon a pole, a war scythe. The scythe was shrouded in negative energy, shrouded in the same black smog as before. Ainz used the magical link he had with the Doom Lord to give it his orders. It is highly probable that our opponent is not a living creature, but try to confirm it anyways. His order was vague. Needless to say, a summon possessed a portion of his summoner's knowledge, so it should have understood his intentions even without his order, but it was better to veer on the safer side of things. The Doom Lord activated its special ability, Runa Snight. The rate at which the black smog spewed out of it increased, spreading to his surroundings. Its HP was filling faster than ever, the cost for a short-term boost to every one of his combat-related stats. Not only that, an opponent's passive ability to reduce the amount of damage the Doom Lord dealt to it due to level difference would be completely nullified. Undead that stood in the black smog, including the Doom Lord itself, would take less damage from light and holy elemental attacks. The same applied for bonus damage due to the difference in karma. Another strength of this ability was the fact that it could be triggered simultaneously on top of other buffs. Ainz wanted to receive that buff too, but the black smog only reached so far. To make sure that he would not be targeted by Riku, Ainz pulled away from the two combatants. He had made preparations to be a spectator. It was time for him to understand the true extent of Riku's power. The Doom Lord's scythe clashed with the floating greatsword, and an ear-piercing noise echoed around. Neither backed off a single step, nor were they knocked back. They must have had similar levels of strength for that to happen. After that, the scythe continued to clash against the katana at high speeds, their metallic rings droned on. The greatsword's hack was rendered inert by the scythe, and the scythe's pierce was blocked by the shield-like hammer. The darting spear was deflected by the scythe's handle, as the Doom Lord gracefully dodged the greatsword's cleave. Soon enough, to take advantage of the distance created by the dodge, Riku leapt forward. Both were on equal footing in terms of offensive and defensive capabilities, but Riku had more tricks up his sleeve. Negative burst. Black rays of unholy light began pulsing from Ainz, as the spell quickly swallowed up his surroundings. The Doom Lord healed upon receiving the negative energy, but it was not the most mana-efficient way to heal. On the other hand, Riku did not take damage from the spell at all. For him to have taken 0 damage, was it because he had immunity to negative energy? Was it a racial trait? Or was it a job trait? Or perhaps, the most likely explanation, was that it had something to do with his equipment. To have planned to fight against the undead Ainz meant that by common sense, he must have prepared against negative energy attacks, a staple of the undead. Even Ainz would equip items that bestowed fire resistance if he were to fight against a fire-breathing dragon. While the sounds of their weapons colliding with each other rang out non-stop, Ainz cast his next spell. Perfect Unknowable. Ainz, now an unknown, came out of the shadow of his tank, the Doom Lord, to circle around them. Suddenly, the katana flew towards him at a speed he could not dodge. It pierced through his robe at the abdomen region. He did not take any damage due to his immunity to piercing damage, but Ainz still scuttled behind the Doom Lord's figure. The katana, suspended mid-air, then began to slash towards the Doom Lord instead. He could see through a nobility This was not surprising, one would not need to reach Ainz's level to gain a couple of countermeasures against that strategy. The problem laid in what method he had used to detect him. Ainz had no answers. There were just too many countermeasures, too many for him to narrow it down with the intel he had. So, what should his next move be? Riku seemed to want to target Ainz directly, given how the levitating weapons were all pointed at him, but with the Doom Lord's presence, they could not reach him at all. After rough calculations of his available options given the current status of the battle, he arrived at the conclusion that he should be spamming offensive spells. If the Doom Lord fell, he could just summon another. The likelihood of this strategy to win was quite high. However, this was not the way Ainz wanted to end this. Riku was a powerful foe, something of a rarity in this world, and with myriad abilities foreign to Ainz. Given that was the case, it was better for him to witness the full extent of Riku's power over the course of this battle, so that he would be better prepared should a similar foe show up in the future. Ainz cancelled the cast of an attack spell. While he knew that his priority right now should be on his own defense, he had a specific reason to not do so. It was dangerous, sure, but he had to resist the urge. Ainz observed the two's attacks and defenses. The Doom Lord was being suppressed ever so slightly, but neither were taking significant damage. One could call the blows that they were exchanging it back and forth, but the simplicity in Riku's fighting style was quite worrying. Ainz knew exactly why the Doom Lord could not gain the upper hand. None of his skills, negative energy attacks, or spiritual attacks, had any effects against Riku. At this point, it was all but confirmed that Riku was of a race that had similar properties as golems or other constructs. Perhaps it was some item ability or skill that gave him said properties, or perhaps he was just a plain construct. In terms of which option was most likely, it had to be the first one given that Riku was able to talk. Half-golems or similar races had the same resistances as other constructs, so he might be a member of one of those races. Although, why would someone of those races be helping out the kingdom? What mattered the most in the moment were Riku's abilities and not his motivations. Why was he using such simple attacks? He appeared to have neither used skills nor martial arts the entire time. One of the supreme beings was a golem user. Riku's movements were nearly identical to the golems controlled by that person. Riku would be easy to deal with if he was a half-golem, but if he was a pure golem with speakers attached or made through secret techniques, things would be much more difficult. As far as Ainz knew, a golem's strength scaled with the value of metal used to construct them, the creator's abilities, and the data crystals added. High-tier golems were relatively costly to manufacture. If Riku was a golem, when constructed out of a metal as cheap as platinum yet was this strong, there might be more than a few or even dozens of him laying around. He had to collect more intel. Ainz gave the Doom Lord an order. The Doom Lord began releasing more black smog upon receiving his command. His speed and offensive capabilities were raised even further, to the point where Riku's armor began to take damage. However, the rapid loss of HP on the Doom Lord's part caused it to disappear not long after. Ainz had time for this, as he cast another 10th tier summon undead. It was a level 68 undead, an elemental skull. Its appearance was of a floating skull, surrounding it was a magical haze of light that constantly switched between 4 colors: red, blue, green, and yellow. Ainz made it fall back and took his place at the front. The elemental skull was a caster-type undead, capable of using magic of the 4 major elements. Its HP was about equal to a magic caster of its level, way below that of the Doom Lord. Its offensive capabilities were pretty impressive. That was because every single spell it cast had the maximized magic metamagic tagged onto it. In terms of defense, it had immunity to most spell attacks, including fire, lightning, acid, ice, and other types of elemental attacks. In contrast, it was extremely vulnerable against physical attacks, especially bludgeoning damage. That was why Ainz had to stand in front of it. Riku did not raise his guard any further, even though a magic caster was now at the front line. He just kept silent, closed the distance between him and Ainz, and began attacking. "Why are you not the least bit worried about this?" Ainz grumbled in his heart as he used the experience he had gained through his training with Albedo to block Riku's slashes. That said, he could only block 1 slash out of 5, it was basically a one-sided pummel. As Ainz's staff was ignored, the greatsword, spear, and katana began their attacks. Though the hammer was used once too, it was nullified by a body of effulgent barrel. After 3 nullifications, Riku appeared to have finally taken the hint. He never used the hammer afterwards. While Ainz had already known about this, Riku was indeed insanely fast. Although he was not as fast as the 4 guardians, he was still relatively fast. Ainz was quite fortunate that Riku had stopped using the hammer. If it were still in use, Ainz would not be able to win at all. Having borne witness to the Doom Lord's battle, Ainz knew he could not serve as an adequate vanguard. Of course, Ainz had the option of using Perfect Warrior, but the lack of equipment on his person would guarantee him a loss if he did so. Still, Ainz's struggles at being a vanguard began to see some returns as spells began soaring through the air from his back. At the same time, Ainz cast the 9th tier spell, Vermilion Nova. The strongest single-target fire-based spell attack began to scorch Riku, yet his opponent showed no signs of slowing down, as the greatsword cleaved towards Ainz again. Even though his body was wreathed in flame, his swordsmanship remained compassed and steady. If he had made his resolve as a warrior, this would not be too surprising, but the complete lack of response from him was suspicious to say the least. The elemental skull cast a 9th tier spell, Polar Claw. The claw that emitted air as chilled as the pulse tore into Riku. This was a spell that Ainz had not learnt. It had no secondary effects, but could deal a lot of damage, the highest DPS of any ice-based spell in fact. Ainz memorized the amount of damage Riku took from the 2 spells. This was while he was receiving a simultaneous strike from the spear and the katana. He cast another 9th tier spell, Call Greater Thunder. The elemental skull on the other hand, cast a 10th tier spell, Mist of Super Acid. This was also a spell that Ainz had not learned. That was the reason why he had summoned the elemental skull. Riku was instantly surrounded by a mist of strong acid, and so were his weapons. Mists of Super Acid not only damaged an opponent, but also their equipment and weapons, albeit only a small amount of damage to those. Surely the floating armaments around Riku counted as his equipment, right? Even the weapons around Riku were damaged, yet Ainz, who was well within the AoE, was unscathed. This was because of a special condition applied to the spell.